Now it's time for today's perspective. And the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is facing a confidence vote in the German Parliament later that he is expected to lose. Now that probable loss paving the way for the European Union's most populous member and biggest economy to hold an early election in February. His three-party coalition government collapsed over a month ago after he fired his finance minister in a long-running dispute over how to revitalise the economy, and the minister's pro-business party quit the coalition. New elections set probably anyway to be held on February the 23rd. Well, joining us now is Matthias Dilling. He's Assistant Professor in Political Science at Trinity College in Dublin, co-convenor of the German Politics Specialist Group. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme today. There's very little doubt, is there, that Olaf Scholz is going to lose this vote?
Yes, it is. It is very widely expected that Olaf Scholz will lose this vote. Even if the remaining coalition did support Scholz in the vote in its entirety, he would still need an additional 42 votes to achieve a majority. But Scholz is unlikely to even gain the support of the entirety of the remaining coalition, since the Greens have recommended their parliamentarians to abstain. The reason for this being that that they want to make sure that the far-right AfD could not provide the votes needed for a majority. So Scholz is very, very likely to lose this vote.
He didn't have to do it, though, did he? Call it. Why did he?
That's correct. He would have not needed to call a confidence vote, despite lacking majority support in the Bundestag. Germany's constructive vote of no confidence, which is Article 67 of the Basic Law, would have meant that to replace Scholz, the opposition would have needed to agree on a new chancellor who would be supported by a majority of parliament, as happened in 1982. When the FDP left the coalition with the SPD and agreed to elect Helmut Kohl as a new chancellor together with the CDU-CSU, and no such alternative majority exists in the current parliament. However, even though the chancellor could have stayed on as the chancellor of a minority government, he would have had a very, very hard time to pass legislative proposals, most notably the 2025 budget. And so Scholz made very clear early on, after releasing Lindner and the FDP ministers of their duties, that he would seek a confidence vote to call new elections.
So assuming he does lose, what on earth happens next?
So assuming that he will lose, which is, as I said, the likely outcome, he will visit Federal President Frank-Walter Steinmeier in Bellevue to ask him to dissolve the Bundestag. The president has until January 6th to do so. As was already said earlier, the 23rd of February would then be, or is then be, the likely election day.
And looking at the polls and judging from what's happened so far, I mean, even if there is a new election, do you think it's likely to solve the problems, or is everything just going to settle in a very, very similar position where no one will really have overall power?
I think we are definitely undergoing a period of tremendous change in German politics. It is true that the polls currently predict a very high level of fragmentation in the new parliament, which is likely to make a government formation more complicated than it used to be. And so it's certainly a somewhat turbulent and exciting time in German politics.
I mean, it's strange listening to you talking about this, because I almost feel like you could be talking about the situation here in France. We've got the two big powerhouses, if you like, of the European economy, with two very, very polarised and very, very divided governments. And it's causing real headaches, not just for Germany, but in France as well. There are certainly some similarities across not only in Germany and France, but also across Western European democracies at large. We have seen a growth kind of toward more fragmentation, toward more polarization, and toward more difficult government formation. Obviously, kind of this all relates also around kind of mainstream parties' response to the far right, and it's an issue that certainly needs to be addressed in many democracies in Europe. And it's difficult, isn't it, as well, particularly for Anglophones? I mean, people in the US are used to a two-party electoral system. People in the UK are used to, well, two very big parties with a few other fringe parties. But Anglophones perhaps are not so used to this situation where there are many different parties, all with different groups, having to form coalitions in order to form governments.
It's unusual. I mean, if we look at the kind of recent kind of polls and election results in the UK as well, there have been like kind of prior to this year's election, there have been kind of discussions around growing fragmentation as well. The UK obviously also had a coalition government following the 2010 election, but it is true that Of course, as you mentioned, the electoral system is kind of an important driver here, that a more proportional translation of votes into seats typically generates all else equal, a more fragmented party system, and thus makes coalitions more likely, which, however, does not have to be a negative thing, right? I mean, we need to remember that countries like Germany have been governed by coalitions since the end of World War II. And so coalitions per se are not necessarily a recipe for instability. It is combined with this growing polarization that has made government formation more complicated.
And what about on a personal level? Where does this leave Olaf Scholz at the end of this, do you think?
I mean, Olaf Scholz has been renominated as the Chancellor candidate for the Social Democrats in the upcoming election. And of course, I'm sure he is running this election to win, even though the polls currently suggest that there's quite a bit of catching up to do to catch up to the leading Christian Democrats in the polls. But I would also urge, I mean, we had election campaigns where the outcome seemed to be fairly clear at the start of the campaign, if I think about 2005, if I think about 2021, and then the actual results ended up being quite different, and much closer than initially expected, and so I think we need to wait and see how the campaign will unfold. And I'm sure I would expect Olaf Scholz to do the best that he can in his campaign.
And just finally, I mean, we're so used, aren't we, to thinking of Germany and thinking of Angela Merkel as the big leader of Germany. For so long she was there. Was this kind of almost inevitable, do you think, after her demise and her leaving the political scene, that there was going to be this division and fracturing, if you like, of the German electorate?
I usually don't like to speak about inevitabilities in politics. I think politics is made by people, both on the voter side, but also on the party side. It's made by the decisions by key actors, and so I never really kind of felt very easy with this kind of notion of inevitability.
Good to talk to you on the programme today. Thanks very much for joining us, Matthias Dilling, Assistant Professor in Political Science at Trinity College in Dublin, co-convenor of the German Politics Specialist Group. Thanks very much once again.